Recently, the French Navy's seizure of a tanker, which is suspected to be part of Russia's shadow fleet, has become a major focal point in global energy trade and the Western sanctions campaign against Russia. The incident occurred on September 28th, when the French Navy Special Forces intercepted the vessel, the Boracay, also known as Long Beach Island. It was about 20 nautical miles off of the coast of Saint-Nazaire, France. The ship was carrying a large load of oil from Russia bound for India, and was not flying any flags. When questioned, the crew gave conflicting answers about the ship's registration, sometimes claiming it was from Benin, other times stating it had no nationality. The French forces immediately seized the ship and arrested the Chinese captain and first officer. Previously, a video from the ship's Chinese crew was uploaded to Douyin, but it was quickly removed, and the related account has disappeared. This reflects the extreme sensitivity of the incident and the Chinese government's tight control over potential public opinion risks. The prosecutor's office in France has launched an investigation into the incident. The Chinese captain is particularly under scrutiny. He's charged with refusing to provide proof of the ship's nationality and disobeying the French Navy's orders. He is scheduled to stand trial on February 23, 2026. If convicted, he could face up to a year in prison and a fine of 150,000 euros. Sources close to the case revealed that the captain and his first officer were returned to the Boracay on October 3rd, and the ship resumed its journey that night. Marine traffic and vessel finder show the vessel crossing the Bay of Biscay, heading towards the Suez Canal and then on to India. This shift suggests that while the French successfully enforced the law, they did not permanently seize the ship. The captain's trial may become a long-standing diplomatic and geopolitical issue. Additionally, reports from AFP suggest that the Boracay may have been involved in the late September drone incidents that disrupted Danish air traffic. The tanker was near Denmark's coast at the time, and it is suspected that it might have served as a launch platform or decoy for the drones. The Boracay is an aging Soviet-era tank, 244 meters long, built in 2003 and carrying a dead weight of around 105,000 tons. It specializes in transporting oil from Russia. The vessel is currently flying the flag of Benin, a small African country. Shadow fleets often do this for registration convenience. The ship loaded about 105,000 tons of oil at Russia's Primorsk port on September 20th, bound for India's Vadinar port and the Nayara energy refinery, which is 49% owned by Russia's Rosneft. After leaving port on the 20th, it passed through the Gulf of Finland, then entered Danish waters. On September 22nd, it was located around 50 nautical miles south of Copenhagen, just hours before Denmark and Norway closed their airports due to an unidentified large drone in the airspace. The Boracay's movements coincided with this drone activity. On September 25th, the ship entered the North Sea, crossed the English Channel, and entered the Bay of Biscay before being seized by France on September 28th. The Boracay's regulatory violations illustrate the gray areas of international shipping regulations and show how shadow fleets operate on the edges of the rules. After boarding the vessel, the French Navy discovered that its AIS system had been turned off for a long time, and the ship had changed its name 6 times since 2020. In fact, the European Union blacklisted the vessel in 2024 for allegedly transporting Russian oil in violation of the price cap mechanism set in December 2022. The ship's previous name was the Mercury. The U.S. Treasury Department also imposed sanctions on the vessel in January 2025 for its involvement in Russian oil transshipment. According to Bloomberg data, the average price of Urals crude oil in September reached $65 per barrel. The 105,000 tons of cargo on the Boracay, if calculated at the price cap, is worth only $56 million, but the actual selling price may be 20% higher, directly funding Russia's war effort. On April 11th of this year, the ship was also seized by the Estonian Navy in the waters off Tallinn Bay. At that time, it had been renamed Kiwala. On the morning of the seizure, the Estonian Navy's patrol ship, Admiral Cohen, spotted the Kiwala about 50 nautical miles east of Tallinn Bay. The vessel was not flying any flags, its AIS system was turned off, and it was only moving at 5 knots, raising suspicions. The Navy immediately issued a radio warning, demanding the ship stop for inspection, but the captain refused, claiming it was a harmless passage. At noon, the Estonian Navy's special forces boarded the vessel via helicopter and speedboat, took control of the deck, and arrested the Indian captain and several crew members. The inspection revealed that the ship had no proof of nationality, no insurance documents, and had not undergone a required inspection. There was severe corrosion on the hull. The ship was then towed to Muga port for full investigation. At the time of its detention, the Kiwala was empty, having departed from offshore Norway and headed towards Russia's Ust-Luga port, where it was expected to load Russian oil for transshipment to Asia. The Kiwala was owned by Gessi Maritime Corp., registered in the Seychelles, and managed by the UAE's Maple Maritime Solutions, claiming to fly the flag of Djibouti. Like Benin, Djibouti is a small African nation commonly used for convenient registration. On April 28th, the Kiwala was released after paying a €50,000 fine, reflagged, and allowed to continue its journey. While the captain was not prosecuted, this event showed NATO strengthening its surveillance of shadow fleets, foreshadowing the later French seizure of the Boracay. In the current geopolitical context, the Boracay seizure not only exposed how Russia uses shadow fleets to bypass the EU and G7's oil price cap mechanism, but also involved Chinese and Indian nationals, igniting a subtle diplomatic game between China, Russia, India, and the West. It marks a significant shift in Europe's strategy to pressure Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron stated that this operation is part of Europe's new strategy to block Russian war funding. France is shifting towards a policy of obstruction, and when suspicious ships involved in such trafficking are found in its waters, it will take action. He believes that this tanker is part of Russia's Shadow Fleet, a group of old unregistered tankers that often shut off their transponders to avoid Western sanctions while transporting Russian oil. Macron estimates this fleet consists of 800 to 1,000 ships. Macron stated that 30 to 40% of Russia's war funding comes from the income generated by the shadow fleet, equating to more than 30 billion euros. He emphasized the importance of increasing pressure on this fleet, as it would clearly weaken Russia's ability to fund its war efforts. Even seizing these ships for just a few days or weeks could strangle their business model. France's actions immediately triggered a strong response from Russian President Vladimir Putin. On October 2nd, during a meeting at the Kremlin, Putin accused France of seizing ships without reason, stating there are no military goods or drones on board. He compared Macron to a politician trying to distract attention from domestic problems. Putin said, "It's piracy, and how do you deal with pirates? You destroy them." While this does not mean that a global maritime war will break out tomorrow, the risks have significantly increased. This diplomatic clash quickly escalated. The Russian embassy in France summoned the French diplomat to protest the violation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Putin vowed a significant response, which could include reciprocal inspections of French commercial ships or an expansion of drone operations on the Black Sea. In response to Russia's tough rhetoric, Macron stated on October 2nd that the French Navy improper and highly aggressive behavior from the crew during the boarding, which justified the launch of a judicial investigation. NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte also expressed support, calling it defensive enforcement. The clash between both sides also extended to the drone issue. Russia denied any involvement in the Danish incident, claiming that NATO is speculating. As major buyers of Russian oil, China and India have been cautious in their response to the French seizure of the Boracay. Several days after the incident, neither government issued an official statement, but their positions and potential impacts can be inferred through media, social media, and indirect channels. China's response has been relatively restrained. In a routine press conference on October 3rd, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs vaguely commented, stating, "China is concerned about the situation, and relevant shipping activities should comply with international regulations." This response aligns with Beijing's usual approach, avoiding direct criticism of France to avoid affecting Sino-French economic and trade relations. Chinese-language media outlets like the South China Morning Post quickly followed up, highlighting the victimized status of the Chinese captain and calling on France to provide consular assistance. The Chinese embassy in France has intervened, confirming the captain's health and requesting France to safeguard his rights, but has not publicly protested. This subdued handling may stem from the widespread employment of Chinese sailors in shadow fleets. They are estimated to make up 30% of the workforce. If China were to openly confront France, it could provoke more targeted actions from the West. On social media, however, Chinese netizens have reacted strongly and emotionally. On platforms like Douyin and Weibo, related videos and posts quickly reached millions of views. A short video titled "French Army Arrests Chinese Captain" accumulated 74,800 likes, and the comment sections were filled with phrases like "Putin is right, this is piracy," and "Protect Chinese sailors, China should intervene." These discussions not only reinforce anti-Western narratives, but also link to broader China-Russia cooperation. Some netizens speculated that the incident could accelerate China's pivot to Arctic shipping routes, bypassing European waters. The Chinese Seafarers Association privately expressed concerns, warning that this case could lead to a 20% increase in wages for Chinese sailors and higher insurance costs. It is well known that China is the largest buyer of Russian oil. On Douyin, there are many videos posted on sailor influencers showing their repeated trips to Russian ports to load oil.
Right now, our ship is loading crude oil in Russia. We are loading 50,000 tons, which is about 360,000 barrels, worth up to $240 million, 30% below the market price. It's quite a good deal, isn't it? We're loading at the port on Murmansk, this mysterious place near the Arctic, where the cold is beyond imagination. But it's one of Russia's ice-free ports. As the pilot disembarked, I officially started at 40-plus day voyage back home, covering about 13,000 nautical miles.
Unlike India, which directly hires Russia's shadow fleet to transport crude oil, Chinese buyers mostly use transshipment to avoid Western sanctions more discreetly. On China's short video platform Douyin, many international trade practitioners share their experiences with transshipment of Russian oil. In one video, the blogger breaks down the entire process of Russian oil transshipment to China.
The first port of departure for Russian oil is St. Petersburg, where the consignor is a Russian oil company. When there's a challenge here, how do you find a ship willing to go to St. Petersburg to load oil? With sanctions on Russia, your tanker will be easily tracked by the US. So the first challenge is finding a ship that is willing to load oil in Russia.
According to the blogger's operational path, once a ship is found, it departs from St. Petersburg and makes its first stop in Dubai Port, UAE. At this point, transshipment traders like GAC, a global logistics giant, step in, swapping the original bill of lading with a transshipment one. The consignor is changed to a UAE trading company, the port of departure is switched to a Kazakhstan offshore port, and the certificate of origin is adjusted to Kazakhstan. This raises the second question. How do you convince Kazakhstan to issue a false certificate of origin? You need layers of coordination to avoid directly revealing the Russian source. Upon arriving in Dubai, the tanker unloads its cargo into a bonded warehouse, which is the third challenge. How to allocate warehouse tanks to specific buyers. You need to pre-rent space or use a service provider's storage network to secure space. After that, the ship undergoes a second exchange of bills and possibly a change of ship. The transshipment port is officially set as Dubai, with the UAE authorities issuing an uncut certificate. The blogger, who is a transshipment trade practitioner, admits that these three difficult steps are handled by professional international transshipment providers like GAC. They take on the biggest risks and control the key elements, so they receive the highest profits, usually 30 to 50% of the total. This multi-layered transshipment operation eventually washes the identity of Russian oil, completely avoiding European Union and US price caps and ship bans, while the high difficulty in regulation due to multiple jurisdictions makes it the top strategy for Chinese buyers to evade sanctions. Now let's look at India's reaction to the seized ship. The buyer of the Boracay's cargo is Nayara Energy, a refinery in India's Vadanar port. According to Reuters, Nayara Energy has activated its emergency plan, contacting Middle Eastern suppliers to compensate for potential delays. If the 105,000 tons of oil is delayed until October 20th, it will lead to a 5% idle capacity at the refinery. India's Ministry of External Affairs declined to comment on the incident, only reiterating that India's energy imports comply with international standards, including the G7 price cap. This position aligns with New Delhi's consistent strategic autonomy, avoiding getting caught up in the Western sanctions debate. Data shows that in the first half of 2025, India's oil exports from Russia accounted for 35% of its total imports, worth over $50 billion. Indian oil officials privately told Bloomberg that New Delhi is considering negotiating alternative shipping routes with Russia, such as through Iran or the Malacca Strait, but this would raise freight costs by 15%. Additionally, the incident has highlighted India's concerns about the EU. It's worth noting that in July this year, the EU's 18th round of sanctions on Russia targeted India's Vadinar port, specifically Nayara Energy's refinery. This marked the first time the EU sanctioned a third country refinery, signaling an expansion of sanctions from the core of Russia to its peripheral networks. The sanctions include a ban on EU member states importing refined products from Nayara Energy and freezing the company's access to European bank transactions. A statement from the EU foreign ministers meeting said that the move was taken due to Nayara's ownership ties with Russia's Rosneft, which directly funds Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It also expands the embargo list on shadow fleets, including 10 tankers that frequently dock at Vadinar. This action sparked a public condemnation from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. Modi stated on national broadcast on July 20th, "India does not accept any unilateral measures. This not only violates international trade rules, but also exposes the EU's double standards." The sanctions immediately hit Nayara hard. On July 29th, the company reduced the capacity of its Vadinar refinery to 70 to 80%, resulting in a daily loss of 50 million rupees, or over $560,000 US. Additionally, the G7 issued a joint statement from its finance ministers on October 1st, 2025, pledging to maximize pressure on Moscow and targeting countries and entities that have continued to purchase Russian oil since the outbreak of the war. While China and India were not directly named, the statement clearly targeted major Asian buyers. The statement emphasized, "We will target those who have increased their purchases of Russian oil since the invasion of Ukraine and those who are facilitating circumvention." This marks a significant escalation in the G7's oil sanctions campaign against Russia, with the intention to expand trade measures, including tariffs and import-export bans, aiming to cut off about $70 billion in Russian oil revenue by 2025. At the time of the statement, U.S. President Trump's administration reiterated that if the EU follows through on tariffs on Russian oil buyers, the U.S. will extend and strengthen related measures. For weeks, Trump has been pursuing allies to completely stop importing Russian oil and to impose severe sanctions on countries that continue buying. An anonymous U.S. official revealed that Trump is considering imposing tariffs of 50 to 100% on China and India to punish their purchases of Russian oil. These coordinated efforts aim to weaken Russia's ability to finance its war efforts and will accelerate the complete decoupling of Russia's energy industry from the West. It is expected that Russia's oil export share will continue to shrink. The G7 stance reflects a shift to a more aggressive economic pressure strategy after 3 years of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which will profoundly impact the global energy landscape.